Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if the Minsk agreements were successful. I know that alternate history should take events that are a little bit further in the past, but due to the current war in the Ukraine, I thought it could be very interesting to see what could have been if the Minsk agreements were successful. There are currently two types of Minsk agreements. The first one, the so-called Minsk Protocol, and the second one, the Minsk II. The Minsk Protocol was a reaction to the instability that happened in Ukraine after the Euromaidan and the ousting of Yanukovych. As we know, the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine started to worry about their future within Ukraine, and there were some fact-based claims. They feared that Russia would lose its position within Ukraine. Not everybody who is a Ukrainian citizen speaks Ukrainian at home. And they were also afraid that Ukraine would not just distance themselves from Russia, but have a falling out with Russia. The Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts in particular were very affected, not to mention Crimea. In order to solve the problem, a group was established in June 2014 to discuss these issues. Within the group, the OSCE, Ukraine, Russia, and even the rebel leaders were present or represented. The mediators were Germany and France. The Minsk Protocol didn't solve the conflict, but there were less fights. So in order to completely solve and end the conflict, the so-called Minsk II was decided. This was a response to the fact that the separatists gained important territories and infrastructure such as the Donetsk International Airport. Minsk II included several points such as the immediate and full ceasefire in Donetsk and Luhansk, the pullout of all heavy weapons from both sides, monitoring by the OSCE, discussions of local elections based on the law of Ukraine, amnesties, pardons, decentralizations, restoration of Ukrainian control, and much more. Unfortunately, there has never been any progress whatsoever after 2015. The following weeks and months, fighting sporadically continued, and the planned elections in the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic were continuously postponed until 2018. The Ukrainian media claimed that not a single provision of the Minsk agreements was fulfilled. Leonid Kuchma also resigned, the representative of Ukraine, and he didn't want to represent Ukraine anymore in the Minsk agreements, and also other attempts they bear no fruits at all. As we all know, in February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine or launched its so-called special operation. But yeah, we know that it's a war. But what if all of that changed? What if the Minsk agreements were successful? A very clear point of divergence we have to take would be the Russian integration of Crimea. Crimea, in this timeline, voted for the annexation of Russia through a referendum. Some people claim that this was done in a dubious way, while other observers, they didn't see any problems with it. It is also difficult to get a correct picture on the whole situation because many inhabitants of Crimea, they were and still are indeed pro-Russian. Certainly there are also those that wanted to remain within Ukraine, and there is also a minor but not so little percentage of people who would actually opt for independence. Let's just say that in this alternate timeline, Vladimir Putin would make it clear that he would not agree to an annexation of Crimea. Now people would say, wait, Planet Althistory, isn't this actually something that he would love to annex Crimea, no? No. There are other parts, like Transnistria, South Ossetia, and Abkhazia, that are not inside Russia. And even they wanted at one point to be part of Russia, Russia just didn't accept them as part of Russia. And even with Belarus, where Lukashenko was actually fighting to get an integration with Russia, even in there, well, it's not continuing. Yes, we can say they are puppet states or that Russia has some degree of control over them. That's very true. But they are not part of the Russian territory. So in this timeline, Crimea would declare its independence from Ukraine and Russia would be allowed to station troops in there and also to continuously use the important port of Sevastopol. Of course, Ukraine wouldn't be happy about it because they would not only lose a lot of money, but also Russia would not respect their interpretation of territorial integrity. But for Russia, they would have a deal, yes, with an independent state, only that this time it's not Ukraine, but the independent state of Crimea. So they can actually do whatever they please. The Luhansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic, they would still see conflicts and war going on, but this time around the same would happen in Crimea as well. And the Ukrainian forces, they would then be more spread. But similarly to the Luhansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic, Ukraine wouldn't be able to make huge gains in Crimea. And Crimea then, would stay for a short time independent. Something like the Minsk agreements, they would still be done, but I think this time around Ukraine would be more cooperative due to the fact that Crimea wasn't just annexed or reintegrated by Russia. Ukraine would be a little bit more flexible about certain things, and Russia's only condition would be that they could use the port of Sevastopol. Yes, there would also be this problem about Ukraine not becoming part of the West, but we will come to that a bit later. So at first, Russia, they would actually ask Ukraine to recognize the independence of Crimea, but this would be a deadlock for both sides, and Russia would exactly know that Ukraine would never accept it. So eventually, when negotiating, the Russian usage of Sevastopol would be agreed on, but Russia would then need to give some guarantees, such as not carrying certain types of weapons, or they would just pay a little bit more money to Ukraine. The re-inclusion at this point would be a bit easier, as the Ukrainians and Russian would agree on the most crucial points. People in Crimea, the Luhansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic, they wouldn't, however, give up their independence. And we could see a radical transformation within Ukraine. The Ukrainian system would become more federalized, way federalized. The central state would be very weakened, while autonomous provinces or autonomous republics, they would gain a huge amount of power. We could say that Ukraine would get a similar system like Belgium or Spain, only that in Ukraine there's a difference. They don't have a monarch that could unify them all. So this will also create some issues. The East would be very happy about it, Crimea as well, and most of the money would actually go to the Crimeans and not to the central state of Ukraine. Only a small percentage would flow there. Ukraine would evolve asymmetrically, with Crimea, the Luhansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic getting a booming economy compared to the rest of Ukraine, compared to it. Internal migration could start to happen, but within a few years, I don't think that I can actually make a really good prediction about it. The West, they would be mad, the Ukrainian West. They would be very mad and nationalist sentiments would grow, calling for an unified state and to abolish the autonomy immediately. They would gain some traction and the divide between the northwest and the southeast would grow and paralyze the whole country. And this is where Russia would actually not need to negotiate about Ukraine not becoming part of the West. Yes, Russia would not be able to integrate Ukraine totally in their sphere of influence, but they would have Ukraine in the same spot as Moldova. Look, Moldova has this one little part that is called Gagauzia, which is pro-Russian, and then there is also Transnistria, Pridnestrovye, which claims to be an independent state. Due to that issue, Moldova can't really unify with Romania, or they cannot really approach the West or Russia if they wanted to. Ukraine would still work out some deals with the West, but pro-Western rhetorics would fall on deaf ears if the federalization of Ukraine would also mean that certain regions or provinces, they could veto some laws. The Russian language and Russian culture would still be very present, and so would also the Ukrainian language in the East. The problems within Ukraine would grow, but they would not escalate into a war, or would they? We could get what we have in many parts of the former Soviet Union, a frozen conflict. The conflict would always be reactivated if one side would try to gravitate too much towards the West or towards Russia, and then so much time would pass until other issues would become more predominant again. What does it mean for Russia? Russia would certainly be happy with the status quo. They could still use Crimea. Yes, they would have to pay a bit more, but as compared to OTL, where they built bridges, invested billions and trillions of rubles in infrastructure, pension and social system of Crimea, Russia would actually save some money. NATO wouldn't be able to expand in Ukraine because Ukraine would be a very polarized and paralyzed state. And as a result of not launching the war of special operation, the Nordic countries would never apply for NATO. And NATO expansion could be halted. While Ukraine would not be totally free, there wouldn't be a war in this timeline. Sure, some clashes and violent protests, they would happen, but a war like the one that we have right now would be out of question for some time. Russia would in some way win more from it if it hadn't annexed Crimea. Ukraine would still be a whole, but a very decentralized state. And that's where we leave it for now.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.